Okay, so let's talk a little bit about programming the project. If you have not already watched the video with the demo of the project, I strongly recommend that you do that, because in my experience people don't really know. They think they know what it does, but they don't really know. So watch the demo of the project. Okay, so look at the constraints that you're going to need. This is pretty straightforward. You'll need to have a clock. I used J1. That is the little external buttons that are debounced that work better. If you use the button that's built into the board, I don't remember what that one is, but that's a different one there. And then for the switches, you have to have 5 switches. I very imaginatively, and you had to use V16, you have to use these switches, V16, W16, W17, W15, and R2. These were already numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, so I just kept those numbers, and then I numbered the one that was on 15. I changed it to be 5 so that this would all be one vectored signal. Similarly with the LEDs, I believe these were originally LEDs 7, 8, 9, and 15, and I just changed them to LD 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So like if you look at the original template, like on the switches, these were 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I changed 15 to be 5. And on the LEDs, I changed 7, 8, 9, and 10 to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and changed 15 to be 5. And then for the 7-segment display, I just used it as is, from seg 0 to seg 6, and then I used AN0 to A3, and those are all the constraints that you need. Okay, now let's talk about programming. And do not skip this part. If you skip the part where I talk about how it's going to work and go straight to, try to find where the code is, and by the way, I know that's what a lot of y'all do. If you do that, I'll know, and I'll make sure your program doesn't work. So pay attention. All right, so here's how you're going to need to set up your code. You're going to list your inputs and your outputs. And your inputs and your outputs, you're just going to have, you're not going to have that many. So you'll have the switches, which I have those numbered 5 to 1, and I have them numbered in that direction, so that they're in order from left to right like they are when I'm looking at them. And then you have your clock, you have your LEDs, and you have AN in your segment. Now you're also going to need to have some registers for your state and your next state. And when I set mine up, I needed to have 9 states. So like if you look at how we did it here, we had 9 states. And so that means I need to have at least 4 bits for my state. So I have reg 3:0 state, and also next state, because you set the state in one always block and then you advance it in another always block. Okay, then you might want to have some parameters to identify your states. So for instance, I had the parameters for my 3 states for floor 1. So if you watched the video where I did my state diagram, we had floor 1, 1 open, floor 1, 2 open, and floor 1 closed. And I just called those F11, F12, and F13, and I gave them some binary numbers. Now, if you want to have parameters for all your floors, then you'll have to assign them for the other floors. Okay, so this is what we have so far. If you want to define the other floors as parameters, then you would need to do that. Okay, and then I ended up having 3 always blocks, and in my always blocks, I had one of them was always at always at state. And in this always block, this is where I set up the LEDs and the 7-segment display depending on the state and the switches. And so there were several conditions to look at. And I'll show you how I did it. You may have a more efficient way. I'm going to show you floor 1, and you'll have to figure out floor 2 and floor 3. So the first thing I said was if I was in one of the first 2 states for floor 1, then in these states the door is open, and so I needed to have the LED for the door open, and I also needed to have it, the 7-segment display, show that I was on floor 1. And so this is the segment to show a 1. This just says to put it on the leftmost of the displays. But then, if you're on floor 1, you might be in an emergency state. So this, setting the LEDs, you want to think about what the LEDs are going to be. So what the LEDs are going to be, you have 5 LEDs. These 3 are always going to be your switches from 3 to 1, because they just indicate what floors have been requested. So we can concatenate those with the 2 LEDs that are showing whether you're in an emergency state and whether the door is open. So we're going to have 2 binary numbers here. One will say if you're in an emergency state, the other will say if the door is open, and the last 3 numbers are always going to be your switches. And so if you look here, my first condition is that if I'm in the floor 1 or floor 1, and either my first clock cycle or my second clock cycle, then my door is open. And so because the door is open, this bit is always 1. So that bit is always 1 because the door is open in floor 1-1 and floor 1-2. But if switch 5 is set, that means I'm in an emergency condition. If switch 5 is set, then I need the first bit to be 1. And if switch 5 is not set, then I need the first bit to be 0. And so here are my LEDs. I've got 1 and 1 for emergency on, door open, and then switches 3 through 1 if the emergency is on, else if the emergency is not on, then I have that. Now, if I'm in floor 1, condition 3, that's with the door closed. So if the door is closed, then I need to have it set to be closed, unless, and this is kind of optional, you don't necessarily need to do this. This is saying if the door is blocked, then it would be open, but you shouldn't really ever have this condition. And so if you leave this part out, that would not be a big deal. You could just have this right there out of there. So you could just have this. And that would work just fine. So, so my first condition was if I'm in state F1, 1, F1, 2, and then my next one is I'm in state F1, 3. And then you can imagine what the next states are going to be. So my other conditions are going to be floor 2, 1 or floor 2, 2. That'll be 1. So I'll have that. And so these will be, I'll have if how did I name those? F21, F21. So if state equals F21, or state equals F22, that'll be one condition. The next one will be state equals F23, and then I'll have state equals F31, or state equals F32. And then my last condition I'll need to check is state equals F33. And what's going to be different about all of these? Well, what's going to be different is for 1 and 2, you're going to have the door is going to be open. So you'll need to have that LED lit. And then for this one, the door is not necessarily going to be open. You could check it with the block, but you don't have to. So I'll show you one more. So for floor 2-1 or floor 2-2, then I set my 7-segment display to show 2. Now I don't need to check to see if I'm in an emergency, because if I'm in an emergency, I am definitely on floor 1. And so I don't have to check this condition anymore. I only have to check that on floor 1. And so all I have to do here is set the LED to be 0, 1, 0 because I'm not in an emergency condition, 1 because the door is open, and then switches 3, 2, and 1. And then how are these other states going to be different? Well, for 2, 3, then the door is not going to be open, so that would be a 0. And then for the floor 3, you need your 7-segment display to say 3. So here the 7-segment display says 2. For floor 3, you'd need it to say 3. Okay, so you'll have to figure these out. So what are you going to do if you are on floor 2 in the closed door? What are your 7-segment displays going to be? And then also what are your LEDs going to be? And then similarly, you'll need to figure out what to do for floor 3. And then just in case, because sometimes the compiler doesn't like it if you have conditions that you don't give anything else for. It shouldn't ever be anything other than one of these states, but just in case, I put in an else, and then I just filled in, looks like I did for floor 1. So I just filled in an else if for anything else. Okay, so this is this always block. So this always block set up your LEDs and your 7-segment display. So we had the always at state and switch, and we set up LEDs and 7-segment. Okay, then we'll have another always block. Always at, I don't know if I did state and switch, I think just state. Always at state, and this one is to advance to the next state. And this is where you'll have to use your state diagram to remind yourself of how you're going to be doing that. So it looked like I did do it always at switch and at state. And so the way I did it, and you don't necessarily have to do it the same way, is I used a case statement. And for my case statement, I had a case for each of my 9 different states. Floor 1, 1, floor 1, 2, floor 1, 3, floor 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and floor 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3. And we had decided that when we were at 1, 1, or 2, 1, or 3, 1, that always we were going to go to the next state, that there was no reason not to go to the next state. And so for floor 1, 1, begin, the next state is always going to be floor 1, 2. Now, if I'm in floor 1, 2, we decided that if I'm in floor 1, 2, then I'm going to stay on floor 1, 2 if the door is blocked. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to floor 1, 3. And so if switch 4, that's the door blocked, then the next state is the same state. Else the next state is floor 1, 3. Now if I'm on floor 1, 3, then I have to figure out where I'm going to go next, and that'll depend on whether or not floor 2 has been requested or floor 1 has been requested. So if floor 2 has been requested, then I should go to floor 2. So if switch 2, the next state is floor 2, 1. If floor 2 was not requested, but floor 3 was, then your next state will be floor 3, 1. Otherwise, you might as well just stay where you are. So those are the cases for floor 1. You'll have to figure out floor 2 and 3, but I'll give you the framework for it. Okay, so let's see what you'd need to fill in. So if you are in floor 2, state 1, I say there's only one place for you to go. So you would put that there. If you're in floor 2, the second state, then I say what you do depends on switch 4, and switch 4 is whether or not the door is locked. So if switch 4 is set, you'll do one thing, and if not, you'll do something else. Now, if you are on floor 2 in the third state, then you might go to the first floor, you might go to the third floor, you might stay where you are. All that is going to depend on what switches are set and whether you decided the first floor or the third floor had priority. So if switch, and then here, this is going to be either 1 or 3, and then you'd say what that state would be. So if you chose that floor 1 had priority, you would say if switch 1, next state is floor 1, 1. If you had floor 3, then you'd say if switch 3, next state is floor 3, 1. Else, if the other one. So first you'll check floor 3, then you'll check floor 1. So that'd be 3, and then this will be 1. Else, if none of those are true, you'll just stay where you are on floor 2, 3. And then you have floor 3 to deal with. For 3, 1, I'm saying you're just going to go on to 3, 2. When you're on 3, 2, it's going to depend on whether or not the door is locked. And when you're on 3, 3, then you just have to decide based on the switches where you're going to go next. And then I had a default just because I always like to have a default, because sometimes it really does not like it if you don't have a default. Okay, and so all of that sets and then you end your case and you end your always block. So that was our second always block. So our second always block, and that was always at switch and state. That determines your next state. And you'll have one more always block, and this always block advances the next state. And it's going to be the easiest one of all because there's not much to it. The only thing you have to do is check to make sure that you're not in an emergency state. So here's the third always block, always at positive edge clock begin. If you're in the emergency state, if switch 5, that means you're the emergency state, then you should go to floor F11. Else, you should advance your state to the next state. And then that is the end of your module. Email me if you have questions.